Steve Johnson. Welcome back to Renovation Project. It was back in 1974 that I asked Layla to marry me. Well, actually, a little technicality. She actually asked me to marry her, but that's a different story. At the time, I was traveling with Youth with a Mission and with a singing group called The Family. And at age 20, I think at the time, I really wasn't thinking what I was going to do for a living to support my new wife. It hadn't really crossed my mind, but it had crossed Layla's mind. And she said to me one day, "So what is it you want to do for a living?" I think it kind of caught me by surprise, like I actually had to do something for a living. She said, "Well, what interests you? What sounds exciting?" I said, "I don't know." I kind of looked back in my mind a little bit and thought, I kind of enjoyed my woodworking class back in school, and that's all she needed. She said, "Okay, let's get you a job building sailboats." And I looked at her and I said, "You're serious, right?" You see, we've been discussing coming out of YWAM and perhaps doing a sailboat ministry in the South Pacific and some of the islands that were there. It was kind of an exotic dream that we had, evangelizing and starting churches. I'd studied French, and she, of course, being born in Argentina, had the Spanish part down pretty good. I said to her, I have zero skills, really. I don't have any job history. I have no resume. Do you actually think somebody's going to hire me to build sailboats? And she looked at me with those beautiful blue eyes of hers and said, "Of course I do." Well, the strangest thing is my younger sister Cheryl was dating a guy for a very short period of time who just happened to be a Finnish carpenter building custom cruising sailboats called Challenger yachts. At the time, it was down in the port of not Long Beach. It was in Los Angeles. She dated this guy, like I said, for a very short time, but through her, I met a guy named Roger. And he said, I don't know if he meant it or not, but he said, "Hey, I can probably get you an interview." I just looked at Layla and kind of shook my head, and he smiled and said, "Thank you, you're welcome." When I scheduled an interview with Mr. Stern, the owner of Challenger Yachts, he asked me, of course, about my carpentry background, and I thought, well, there's no reason to pull the wool over this guy's eyes. I might as well just, I'm not going to get this job anyway. I might as well just tell him what's up. So I just looked him straight in the eye and I said, "Well, sir, I had an 8th grade wood shop class, and I really enjoyed it. I think I did pretty well at it. I think it's something I could do pretty well at for you, sir. I'm a quick learner. I'm pretty meticulous. Mr. Stern, all I need is a chance. You won't be disappointed, I promise." Layla was outside praying in the car, of course, and so he asked me to step outside, and then about 15 minutes later, he calls me back in, and he says, "Have a seat." He said, "Steve, I don't know why I'm doing this. It actually makes zero sense, but I kind of like you, and I feel like I'm supposed to give you a shot. So here's the deal." He said, "Roger is going to give you a list of tools and supplies that you need to pick up. And if you have all of those tools and supplies Monday morning at 7 o'clock, everything on his list, I'll give you a shot. And I'm going to give you 30 days to show me that I did not make a huge mistake." So I just looked at him in disbelief and I said, "Well, thank you, Mr. Stern. I'll see you on Monday." Well, so Monday morning rolls around at 7 o'clock, and I show up with my brand new red Craftsman toolbox filled with things I didn't even know existed or how to use them. And I thought Roger was going to mentor me, but as it turned out, everyone at Challenger Yachts was on piecework. In other words, the galley section, the V-berth, the head, all of these kind of had a labor price tag on them. And the faster you completed that particular section, that it was worth so many dollars. And so the quicker you completed the section, the more money you would make. So Roger had his own boat, and so he wasn't about to take the time to sit over there and mentor me. So I was going back and forth from my boat to his boat just to see what he was up to and ask him a few questions, and then kind of go back and work it out. I was put on a 50-foot cruising yacht that was comprised of a bare fiberglass hull with a fiberglass deck on it, and several solid teak bulkheads in between that were fiberglassed in, and nothing else there. And I had to basically build the rest of this thing. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing, had no idea why I was there. I mean, what was I thinking? Or better yet, what was Layla thinking? I found out pretty quick that putty and wood filler were not used on luxury cruising yachts. If the piece didn't fit perfectly, it didn't go in, and you had to make custom fit these pieces. And so over a period of time, I mean, I wasn't making a whole lot of money, but I was honing my skills and practicing those skills. But I learned that practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. So if you're practicing average, if you're practicing that'll do, or if you're practicing, you know what, I can't see it from my house type of a thing, if that's the kind of carpentry skills you're developing, as a default, your techniques and your habits are going to reflect that kind of mediocrity. However, practicing the right skills and the right protocols will embed within you a high level of quality and competency that carries over into other aspects of your life. And it also gives you a distaste for cutting corners and sloppiness and things like that. It was that particular experience that set the foundation of my life in the way of doing things with detail and carrying out tasks that would show that you actually cared about what you were doing. Now, you've heard the phrase cutting corners before. We understand that to mean taking shortcuts and skipping normal protocols and cutting out time or quality just to get someplace else because you don't want to take the time to do something correctly. I think there was actually a sign down in our mill, down in the Challenger Yachts mill. It said something like, why is there never enough time to do something right, but there's always enough time to do it over again? And so this whole idea of cutting corners, building sailboats, was not acceptable. But it represents somebody who doesn't have the patience and the willingness, again, to work through the details or to take the time to do something the best that they can possibly do it, but rather lower their standard to the place where they realize this is okay, this is good enough. I think it was Jim Collins in his book Good to Great that said the greatest enemy of great is good, because we typically would say, hey, it's okay. This level's okay. Why spend any more time working something better than this, because this is okay? And we settle ourselves for mediocrity. The people who are okay with cutting corners are those who have an agenda of average. And again, they're typically too lazy to complete the task with excellence, to take it to that next level. And maybe there's a lack of pride in their work, and just, again, don't want to take the time to take it to another level. The Bible talks about cutting corners. It's a different picture, but I want us to take a little bit of time because it provides some fresh insight into the idea of a life that really is focused on ourselves. See, God gave very specific instructions to the Israelites not to harvest the entire field. If you can imagine a big square, rectangular shaped field, God instructed the Israelites not to cut the corners of the fields off, not to harvest all the way to the edges of their property, in other words. And it was a means by which God was giving the poor and the foreigners and the aliens of the land opportunity to harvest. And in their condition of being, again, foreigners or poor, then it was God's way of blessing the Israelites and then telling them, you bless others. You don't need to hoard and harvest every square inch of your property. As I'm taking care of you, as I'm prospering you, then don't cut the corners. Don't take them for yourselves and show that everything you produce is actually yours. Leviticus 19:9 says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you are not to reap to the very edge of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest, the stuff that falls. You just kind of let it go through it one time, and that's good. And in Leviticus here, right in the middle of a bunch of sacrificial and dietary and personal conduct laws, God's telling the Israelites, don't cut the corners of your field. Very interesting, right? And there's more. Not just in harvesting their crops, but when it came to vineyards and grapes and wine, they were also not to pick all the grapes that they harvested. It was like they got one shot to go down the rows, as it were, and then they were to leave some on the vine. They were to leave the grapes that fell on the ground. Verse 10. You must not strip your vineyard bare or gather its fallen grapes. Leave them for the poor and the foreign resident. I am Yahweh your God. So again, if some fell on the ground, you weren't supposed to pick them up. The idea was that those, again, who were blessed would take care of those who didn't have, or were maybe not in a good place at that time. And if you read the story of Ruth, especially the second chapter, you'll really see how this plays out in the way of Ruth being allowed to work in Boaz's field and glean and follow behind the harvesters as they would leave stalks or some of the gleanings that had fallen, or not to totally strip the field bare. And this was a whole idea of God expressing to the Israelites, look, I've blessed you, now it's your turn to be a blessing. But what's interesting is you look at the Leviticus passage there in 19 verses 9 and 10, we notice that God didn't specify how much of the corners they were to leave. How big should I make the corner? And so you could see there would be some leeway there to say, okay, I left a little bit of the corner, but the verse really doesn't say how many grapes to leave or how big the corner should be. It didn't give an exact amount. But you could tell how generous a person was by the size of the corners of their field, or how many grapes were left on the vine, or how many grapes were left on the ground. You could leave small corners and still be in compliance. You could leave a few grapes, and still say, well, yeah, I didn't cut the corners and I didn't strip the vines. But the size of the person's heart was on display by the size of the corners and how many grapes were left on the vine. So if you were cutting the corners of your field and stripping the vines completely bare, you were robbing the poor and the needy. You were showing basically the condition of your heart and how generous or lack of generosity was expressed in your life. The person's generosity was very public, in other words. You have a big field, but you've got little corners. This is a stingy person. Or maybe you even have a small field, but you had generously big corners. You could see that this person had a heart that maybe showed a little bit more compassion. And if there was a lot of grapes left on the vine, a grateful servant of God that understood that God blessed me with this anyway, and I'm going to give back whatever is necessary. But if they stripped it bare, then you could see that there was maybe a hard heart or a stingy heart. So for us and the Israelites, this whole idea of cutting corners is really one of selfishness and greed. It's me or you saying, hey, look, I've worked really hard for all this stuff. It's mine. And nobody could argue with you. God wasn't even arguing that this is your field, from corner to corner to corner. This is yours. What he's telling us is, look, I've given it to you. It's all a gift. Everything. We've come into this world with nothing, and he's given us our talent, our abilities. He's given us insight. And yes, we hone those skills, or we can be slothful and not hone those skills. But the bottom line is we understand that everything we have is a gift from God. And the lesson in all of this cutting corner thing is shown and displayed by how generous we are with what God has given to us. Again, we can choose to utilize those God-given resources in a slothful manner, or again, perfect or hone those skills and live a life or develop a life that shows that we are glorifying God and understanding that the things that are in my life are direct result of how he's blessed me. And here's the deal, friends. You can't outgive God. And we might want to hoard and grab onto things and say mine a lot. And even though God gave it to us, we need to understand that we can't outgive God. But if we start hoarding and clutching down on things, what it does, a number of different things. He can't give us more if we're holding on to what we've already got. But when we open up our palms, yes, he can take away, but he can also add to it. So we need to live lives that are kind of postured like that. When we're cutting corners, we're really saying that everything belongs to me. Look what I've accomplished, and kind of kicking God to the curb a little bit. Cutting corners means that I'm living for myself. It's about me, my gratifications, my outcomes. When I follow the biblical principle of not cutting corners, I'm actually being generous with what I've produced and accumulated because God's been generous with me. And I remember being in Youth with a Mission, as I mentioned, Lauren Cunningham would often say, shovel your blessings out the front door because God shovels his blessings in the back door, and he uses a bigger shovel. And that's the bottom line. You and I can't outgive God, but we can stop his blessings if we start hoarding and if we stop being generous to other people as he's been generous to us. The world hoards, it destroys. And I know it doesn't make sense, but in God's economy, when we live large for God, he lives larger for us. It just is just a principle of his kingdom. When I honed my skills in that boatyard as a finished carpenter, and it was tedious. I didn't always do it right, and I didn't make a whole lot of money at that time. Thank God Layla was working as well. But we were just getting started in our married life, and we didn't have a lot of needs, but and that was a good thing because, again, I wasn't making a whole lot of money because as it took me so long to finish these sections, and I think it took me 11 months to build that first sailboat. But if I look back on that thing, it actually turned out really spectacularly. Howard liked it, never fired me, kept on giving me raises, and it actually worked out pretty well. He had mercy and extended it to me, and I proved that I could learn and be a meticulous carpenter and craftsman. And it's because I refused to cut corners. And perhaps it was because in that particular environment, cutting corners was unacceptable, and I learned that. I couldn't take shortcuts. Yes, there were certain ways in manufacturing and fabricating that would make a process quicker, but it wasn't because you were being sloppy or slothful or that your craftsmanship was second rate. When we cut corners, we not only cheat someone else of something of quality, we cheat ourselves, and we start to lower the standards of our life, and we start compromising in areas that we shouldn't compromise. And friends, this is all a lesson in trusting God to provide. Because unfortunately, we think that I need to hoard this, I need this, who knows, I need to have a rainy day coming, and I can't afford to be generous. Well, that's a lack of faith. God has provided for you up to this point. What makes you think he's not going to continue to do that? Let me wrap this episode up with a story about a guy whose name was Bill. He was a superintendent for a large construction company. They built primarily tract homes, but they did some one-off spec homes periodically. Bill had some issues the latter part of his life, thinking that he had to cut corners, thinking that it was the best way that he could provide for himself. And see, as he was approaching his retirement years, he was not nearly prepared for retirement because even though he had been a faithful project manager for this particular construction company, made a modest income and perks and the normal benefits and all that stuff, illnesses and a lot of stuff going on in the family where he kept on dishing out money to help people and his family and his kids. He just wasn't ever able to build up a nest egg where he was feeling comfortable as he was approaching his retirement years that he actually could retire. And like I mentioned, along with the tract homes that they built, periodically they would do some one-off custom homes. They would buy a piece of property and drop the house and redesign a new custom home on it and then put it on the market and sell it as a spec house. Bill was finishing up one of these big projects, and his boss, Jack, said to him, "Hey, I got this house that I want you to do. It's pretty close to the project that you're wrapping up right now, the big tract project." And so he was going to take on this small custom home. It was then that Bill started listening to the voices of discontent in his own mind and thinking that he saw no end to his predicament. Every day just seemed like the next. And he began feeling unappreciated and abused. He devised this plan in his mind as a result of that to bolster his almost non-existent savings account with thinking that I've got to do something. I've got to take care of myself because it appears that nobody else is going to. And so after receiving the plans, Bill began contacting the subcontractors that he had been using on this big track home project. And what he did is he presented the plans, he gave the scope of work and the material list to all of his subs, and because he had this long-standing relationship with these guys, he proceeded to con them into using subpar materials and cutting corners with labor and cheapening the entire project, and then he was splitting the difference with the subs. He was able to pass inspections, but after the inspector left, he would remove some items to put more money in his pocket. He even removed most of the insulation. He used half-inch drywall instead of 5/8. He chose cheap tile instead of solid stone surfaces. Cheap appliances, cheap plumbing fixtures, and you can imagine. The cabinets were cheap, particle board and all of that. So the craftsmanship of the house was also pretty marginal. For a custom home, landscaping was woefully inadequate. For a custom house, it was getting ready to hit the market. And then towards the end of the project, as he's wrapping this thing up, he had been so careful to, at least in his own mind, to be discreet with the subs and the billing processes and all that stuff. So when Bill got called into the office by his boss, Jack, and said he needed to talk with him, he's going, oh my gosh, did somebody rat me out? What happened? I thought I'd covered all my bases here. And so he goes into his boss's office, and Jack, his boss, was sitting behind his desk, and he smiled at Bill and said, "Hey, Bill, have a seat." At that moment, Bill realized what a bonehead play he had just pulled off here, and he realized what an incredibly poor decision he had made. He had been with his company for so long, and yet now he knew that this was his last day on the job. He had been found out, and he was going to be shown the door after this crazy stunt. And but his boss, Jack, appeared really nervous as well and uncomfortable. He was shuffling in his seat and kind of fidgeting with his pen, and Bill had been his longest-term employee. I mean, he had been there from the start when they were just getting going and some remodel projects, and all of a sudden they got the opportunity to start bidding on some track homes, and he saw Jack's lips start to quiver a little bit, and his eyes were watering, and the weight of this whole decision that Bill had made is now starting to crash in on him. He realized, man, this is one of the lowest points of his life. Well, with a quivering voice, Bill said, he says, "Boss," he said, "I got to tell you something." But Jack, his boss, waved him off and said, "Bill, let me say what I got to say first, and then you can tell me what's on your mind." So Jack looked up at him, and both of their eyes met, and both men's eyes were watering at this point. And he says, "Bill, you've been my longest lasting PM. You were my first PM," he said, actually. "You've always showed up for work on time. You stayed late. You've worked weekends. You've trained other superintendents and PMs. And with all of that, as Jack is pouring on his thanks for his service, Bill's really feeling the guilt of what he has just done and started to look down, and his hands are all sweaty and all of that. And Jack continued. He said, "I've asked a lot of you because I trusted you. You seemed like you were always up for the challenge. You trained, again, my, all of these superintendents and all that, and you represented me and the company better than anybody ever has. You've been with me during the lean years, and now that we're in our times of prosperity." And Jack just looked him right in the eye and said, I apologize that I haven't always been there for you. I haven't always been able to provide or give you the bonuses or give you the raises that you deserved. But he said, I want you to know now that I have always held you in the highest esteem, and I highly regard you and your family, and I respect the man that you are." And this was about more than Bill could handle, as he reached up and he's kind of wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, and he betrayed the trust of his boss and his friend that he had worked with for years and years and years, and he knew that he was just about to be fired. However, Bill was not ready for what was about to happen, and so as Jack, he reaches down and he pulls open the drawer that's right in front of him, and he pulls out a couple of keys, and he puts them on the table, and he slides them over to Bill and says, "Bill, I can't make up for all of those days when I couldn't give you a raise or a bonus, but I wanted you to know that I appreciate you, I respect you." And as he slid the keys over to Bill, he said, "The house you were building was yours. I hope you enjoy it." Is there something you wanted to tell me, Bill? Friends, you and I rarely see the whole picture. We get lost in our own discontent and belief that we're being treated unfairly and unwisely. We begin to cut corners. We think that God isn't watching out for us and the world's against us. He's never been there for us. And so we devise plans to cut corners and provide for ourselves because we think nobody else will. And we lose sight of the fact that God is the one who blesses. God is the one who rewards. God is the one who provides, always has and always will. And friends, cutting corners will only come back to bite us and disappoint us if we are that foolish to go down that pathway. Well, friends, that's it for today. I want to encourage you and to remind you that everything you and I have is a gift from God. He's blessed us. He's promised to cover us, to watch our backs. Don't get caught up in the provisions. Don't even get caught up in the talent that God has given to you. Trust Him. Be generous. Don't cut corners. Don't run through the vineyard and pick up all the grapes or glean the harvested drops. Trust that God will provide for you. He has. And so be a blessing to everyone else and don't cut corners. All right? Till next time. Thanks for joining us today. For more information, check out our website at renovationproject.org. And make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can be alerted to when our next video is posted. Go with God.